Second. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody, wherever you might be in the world. My name's John Berger. I'm the CISO at ReliaQuest. Been at ReliaQuest for about 11 years. Before that, I served in the military for 27. I am thrilled to be here with my co-host, Dennis Guillette. He's the Director and Security Architect, Office of Information Security at the University of South Florida. We do such a lot of great things, so many great things with the University of South Florida. So it's great to have Dennis on, and maybe Dennis, just give us a little thumbnail on yourself.
My name is Dennis Guillette. I am the Director of Security Operations and Engineering here at USF. I have been at USF for 27 years. Basically, I'm in charge of digital forensics, incident response, and other technical controls at the university, including evaluation and implementation. I'm also an adjunct instructor in the colleges of business and criminology.
No, that's awesome. So for today, we're gonna dive right in here. A topic we want to talk about is stop the spread, contain threats in less than 5 minutes, accelerating SecOps in a number of ways. We write here Agentic AI and automation, but we're going to talk through that in detail. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. Real quick, a quick agenda. At the end of the day, how much time do you really have with today's threat landscape? Second thing we want to talk about is how are you measuring how fast you really are and where those places are, contributing to your delays, and then how can we move faster? This is going to be much conversation around speed today. So let's talk about how much time do you really have. At the end of the day, these statistics come from our annual threat report that we publish every year, and we have about 1,000 plus customers. I don't know the exact number today, but as you might imagine, we see the threat show up in our customer environments, and we ReliaQuest help our customers fight through those issues to get to containment. And one of the things that I think we've seen drastically, particularly over the last year, is how fast threats are moving. And so that 48 minutes is probably one of the more scary statistics here, but I'd argue all of them are. But the first number there, 48 minutes, is about, we call it breakout time. What does that mean? That means the threat gained a foothold, the threat established C2, and the threat is in the process of moving, which means in some cases they've escalated privileges, and others they're moving to try to escalate privileges. But they're ready to move. They've established a foothold and they're ready to move. We're seeing more accelerated times also in how long does it take for a threat to find something of value, particularly sensitive information, and that averages around 4.5 hours to where they find something that they deem valuable to exfiltrate, valuable, of course, to the victim company. And then, as many of you know, a lot of times in the double extortion category, what we see is they exfiltrate data first, and then just for additional insurance, they encrypt. And it takes a little longer, ostensibly, to go find some other assets that they find are more valuable or they deem are valuable, so they can actually encrypt a number of things. Obviously, up the stakes in getting the victims to pay a ransom. And then finally, probably the most, what I would argue, the most damning statistic here is how long does it take from detection to manual response or time to contain. And that time that we've seen is about 6.5 hours. And that is what's kind of our mandate today, is arguably the biggest risk in security operations is the lack of speed and or the velocity of the adversary today. And so, it's just something that we have to account for. And I think, Dennis, you've probably seen similar things in your time, over at USF. If you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've been doing investigations at USF for about 20 years. And what I've noticed in the last couple is that, before, you'd see they'd get in, they'd get an account, they'd get a password, they may sit on it for a while, they may sit on the access. But what we've really seen is now, instead of these kind of long-term things, we see what would be akin to a smash and grab, where they will actually break in, they know that you found them, but they're trying to get as much information, as much of a foothold as possible to try to get to you later. Because everything's gotten so much better now, and incident response has gotten so much better everywhere, that they are no longer just kind of trying to stay hidden. Or sometimes they are, but a lot of times they will do something kind of loud, knowing they're in, and then just try to do everything they can to try to get as many passwords out, as much information out as quickly as possible. And so, as I said, we saw things drop from 3 years ago, similar actors from what was 60 days, 65 days to less than 12 hours. So that's kind of
no doubt. And in my history, in the military, we're dealing more with APTs. Oftentimes, APTs are, I would say they're tilted towards a little bit more collection, right? And so this is that may be an intelligent type operation where really staying low and slow is the name of the game, and dwell times were much longer. But I think for the most part, even with the commoditized criminals, obviously they have other goals in mind, and they're clearly moving faster. And so that necessitates a couple of things here. But before we get into that, probably a little bit of discussion on okay, so we got to move faster. So exactly how are we gonna, how do we measure speed? How do we measure our ability to detect, investigate, and contain? And so we've come up, we're measuring things in the following way. And I'm going to go through these because it's important for everyone to understand exactly, how are we measuring. So let's talk about mean time to detect to start. So the average time to identify a threat measured from when the event happens to when the incident is created. And the incident created is typically a ticket is created. And that's a little different than maybe what I would argue Mandiant or academics might measure that, meaning oftentimes, and mean time to detect was measured by what time the actor actually showed up in the environment, maybe undetected, to when then we did detect them. And one of the reasons why we're looking at it this way are twofold. One, we want a practical measure for mean time to detect. And what we're really looking to do is reduce what I would argue is the kind of the latency of the machines that we use to collect, right, to index, to ingest data, and and then obviously run maybe some sort of query or some sort of correlation. And that time is time we might have thought we had before, but it's time we don't have today. So probably the most practical reason why we're measuring it from when an event actually happens and observable in the environment to when the ticket is created. And so we're really looking mostly at the kind of the machine speeds and how long we might have some latency there. We certainly don't have the luxury of looking at, the only time we get a real mean time to detect from an adversary perspective is A, when they show up, and B, when I have forensics. So a practical measure that we use for mean time to detect. Mean time to contain, pretty simple, self-evident, from when the alert fires to when you've actually contained the threat. Most of the time, depending on the nature, this is when you've taken a response play, hopefully, and you don't need to take a bunch of them to contain the threat. However, this is from when the alert fires to when you achieve containment. Mean time to investigate. Sometimes the order is a little bit different, meaning I may have a mean time to detect. I have an alert that fires, and then I investigate. And so that's from when the alert is created to when the incident is when the analysis is complete, and or sometimes we have a number where we talk about escalation. So when the alert was created to when we escalated to a client. And then mean time to resolve is all of that. And so don't want to dwell on that, but if you're not looking at all the components of time, arguably you may be challenged to keep up with what we just talked about with the threat. would like to now talk about what we see, or at least what I see, and I know Dennis has some of these issues as well, is like, hey, what really slows you down? And so we'll talk just a second on that. And I touched on it ahead of, on the last slide on detection latency. Today, particularly with those query-based systems, I would argue that over the last 5 years, the amount of data that we've created in cybersecurity has grown exponentially. What that's typically caused is a couple things. One, there can be some backlog, there can be some congestion in ingesting logs, and sometimes depending on the compute capacity of a given solution, we may be challenged to process that data, to index it, to bring it in so that it's ready for correlation and or query. So we see that a lot, particularly in the last 3 to 5 years based on the explosion of data. Investigations, I think we've seen this, time and time again, where there's a couple of things. People switching between different consoles to figure out what happened. So there's a manual kind of latency to log in and see what happens. So that's probably been an ongoing thing for quite some time. I'd argue also that some organizations, particularly large, complex organizations, are very, very dependent on other entities. So for example, there's a network alert and the security guys may have to ask the network team, hey, did you do this? Or can you look into this? And so there's an inherent latency organizationally there. And containment's very similar. If you don't have automation, if you have manual containment, you're oftentimes either A, having to pivot into a console to take it, or B, you're having to ask another organization. And so I don't know how that applies on your side, Dennis, but those are things that we typically see across many of our customers.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, the amount of data we're logging from 5 years ago to now is probably quadrupled. It's just gotten so much more and so much more information, and the fact that it's gotten so much more complicated and waiting for the network team or the desktop team to do something just is something that we don't have time to do anymore, because if something happens in the middle of the night, they're not always available. The network team is, but the desktop team isn't necessarily available 24/7. And so what we've found is we really need something to happen quickly and fast. And what we found is using some sort of automation allows us to do that, and also actually gives a peace of mind to the other teams where they know something's happening automatically, but we're not necessarily making intricate changes. They know exact the scope of the change we're making. It's already been pre-done, so it's not like we have full access to their systems. We can do certain things well, but we don't have full unfettered access. And that also helps a lot for auditors as well.
Yeah, no doubt. So we've kind of talked about the problem. Sometimes I say we over admire the problem. So let's get to, hey, what should we do to, move faster? And so at the end of the day, a couple of things. Let's talk about the detection problem. So, hey, how do you detect, contain, investigate faster? Let's move to the detection problem. So one of the things that we have seen over the course of probably last 5 to 10 years is all of your technologies, which maybe we used to send events to what we would deem a conventional SIEM, but now they're all these fairly complex and high quality correlation engines. So if you think about your EDR on the left of that slide, anything from a CrowdStrike to a SentinelOne to even a Windows Defender, like, listen, the amount of data they take in order to figure out what's happening on a host is pretty impressive. And the same goes for many of the other functions that I've listed here on this slide. Is your email gateway is a correlation engine. Many of your identity solutions now are correlating events to see what types of events look suspicious, malicious, and they're correlating on those to alarm to you or alert to you something may be going on. And you go down the line, firewall, cloud. And so what we've seen is, listen, at the end of the day, if you directly connect to those, you should think about them as correlation engines. They're almost like a SIM. And then that light blue box, listen, the traditional SIM that you and I have always had, we do see that there's a reason for it today. I know that I personally use it for all my gray matter alerting, right? So anybody that has some sort of app portfolio has to do some security monitoring of that app. I also have it for data loads that these other, correlation engines don't necessarily take on for me. And so what we're seeing is our ability to query and ask those correlation engines or sensors directly. We're doing that on a 3 to 5 minute poll. And on the SIM side, that allows me to reduce the burden on the SIM, right? Because I don't have to send all that data there. And, if you get a fairly fast query SIM, you can actually improve the mean time to detect on your SIM if you do direct connection to these, to these technologies. So direct API, bidirectional API integration has been one of the things that has really helped our mean time to detect times and getting them in less than 3 to 5 minutes if you direct connect to many of the technologies that are absolutely critical. For me personally, and the things I see in customers, the things you really need to have, kind of at what I would say strip alert speed, or EDR and identity as a minimum, are the things that I find are something you need to know. Those are the places where you're going to find malicious activity probably sooner in the kill chain when you're trying to mitigate that breakout time of 48 minutes. Be curious your thought on this. I know that you're similarly minded here, but
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, one thing with the SIM is really good if you need to keep the data for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. But if you only need it for a week, which is a lot of what you just need, it doesn't make much sense to use the disk space. Disk space is expensive. And what we found is by moving some of that stuff just to a direct connection, we've actually tried to lower our amount of spend on our SIM, because the SIM, there's certain things that SIMs are really good at. And it's really good, especially for archiving things after the fact. But at the end of the day, what we found honestly is the gray matter actually a lot of times will give us the alerts before the SIM does. So but that makes sense, right? With the amount of data and how much information is in the tables. And so what we're actually trying to do is try to lower our usage of SIM usage and really try to more increase the use of the other things in this stack, because really when it comes down to it, almost all of our alerts, not all of them, but a lot of them are coming from the non-blue parts.
Yeah, for sure. And you hit on a good point, which is like, some people say, we don't need a SIM. And for some, maybe they don't. However, if you've got a compliance requirement, you're going to have to put it somewhere. That doesn't mean it needs to be a SIM. It could be some sort of, data lake or some other place if it's just for compliance. But if you have some residual need for correlation, having a traditional SIM is absolutely something that's needed. And for me, on EDR, I'm a Sentinel-1 shop. I'm getting 3 to 5 minutes, getting those alerts quick. On identity, Okta, Wiz for me for the cloud, and I'm direct connected to all those. In fact, everything on this slide I'm direct connected to, and so it just increases my mean time to detect, to get that alert, get those alerts being looked at much quicker. And so let's move on from, detection. This is a primary strategy for getting your mean time to detect down. When we look at the numbers across, and we'll share some numbers later on where we are, I can share where we are on average at the business level. But if you've got bidirectional correlation or bidirectional APIs to these technologies, you're going to drastically reduce your mean time to detect in certain areas that are, critically needed. So let's talk a little bit about investigate. So one of the things that we started, I'll talk a little bit about our journey into the AI space. And one of the things that we recognized pretty early on, and it's a blinding flash, but if you're an analyst, you spend 50 to 60% of your time, investigating, doing analysis. And anything I can do to reduce that time, arguably on our side as a provider, and to help our customers, the better off we are. And so we kind of launched this journey about 2 years ago. Last year, we spent the better part of the year getting to parity with the AI versus humans. And the way I like to explain how we achieved it is the following. When we give a regular analyst a problem, let's call it an alert, and we tell that analyst, hey, tell me what happened here, and we give them a set of tools, and we tell them to write a summary and recommendations, you can actually do the same thing with an agentic approach with an AI, where you're giving the agentic model many of the same training principles, and I'll call them, rules, that you do a human. And you can train that model over time based on what we call the cyber analysis methodology. But what you're actually doing is you give this agentic AI agent, if you will, you give it a problem, meaning an alert with a bunch of artifacts, and you give it a bunch of tools. And I'll highlight some of the tools here. Well, obviously, intel enrichment. Well, yeah, our analysts used to go look up certain IOCs, source IPs most of the time, or maybe some sort of hashes, and they'd look them up and find out whether they're on some sort of intel list or malicious list. We would actually allow analysts to pivot into different technologies. So if there's something I need to look up on a host, I look it up on a host. Typically, an analyst would pivot either into the SIM if it's OS data, or maybe even now they might pivot into some sort of EDR to look at host data. And it goes on the pivot searches you might do to qualify an alert. What's been really cool is that there's some really neat tools, like one of the ones that comes to mind for me is like a PowerShell decode tool. Man, that would take a lot of time for an analyst to decode what's happening in some sort of encrypted or encoded PowerShell command. But man, does the AI do it really quickly. And then what the AI does really well is it summarizes the results of each step, and then it summarizes the results. It summarizes the summaries, if you will, and gives a really clean answer. We got parity in accuracy. It took us about 9 months side by side to get there. We were faster out of the hatch, as anybody might assume. And then it took us another 3 months to get us where we felt like we could release this to our customer base and have it actually perform, what I would say much better than our analysts today. And so, I know I was stunned by how good it was. When the agent today says that something is a true positive, we're 99.4% that the customer is going to come back and say that there's a true positive. In terms of speed, about 2.5 to 3 times faster. And so the accuracy and the speed have really improved. However, that's not to say that there are times when we release new content or even some old content that we from time to time run into problems. Then our staff has to go in and kind of retrain, add rules to the rule set for the actual agentic agent to perform better. And sometimes some of those rule sets are unique to a customer. Sometimes those are more what I would consider global rule sets. But I don't know how. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you're seeing there. But a huge kind of improvement in how fast we can get accurate investigations complete. I don't know that there would be a better way to do it, or there actually is a better way to do it than kind of leverage the technology we've seen explode over the last couple of years.
I know for us, what we've really seen, obviously it's fast, but what we really see is the summaries it gives us are really good. The malware stuff with the PowerShell, as you mentioned, that really has been a game changer for us, right? Where we can get the PowerShell unencoded and really know what it does immediately and know what the risk is. And also that helps us do the back end investigation of, well, what did it actually do if it was in there? What damage happened? And so not only did we say there was a problem, but what it allows us to do is to do cleanup quicker and easier because we get so much information, and it really gives you an idea of what's really going on under the covers.
Yeah, for sure. And what we'd like to do, and at some point, it's our interest to release some of the prompting and training of the models to our customers, and that's kind of a vision that ReliaQuest has. In the meantime, what you can expect is when you see kind of that, the boxes that are on this slide, when you go into Gray Matter platform, it's fully transparent on what this agent did. And it'll actually put in there, sometimes it thinks it can make a query and it fails. And then it's got to replan and it comes up with another set of steps. And so at the end of the day, one thing I like about our approach, and it's always been that way, is like we're going to show you the math because there's an inherent black box hesitancy and skepticism, and we get that. We've always been a fairly transparent company, and we don't want AI to contaminate, our values in terms of, hey, here's what it did. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It's technology, but we're not going to hide it. And we want to work together in partnership to get that technology shored up so it does what we need it to do. So the investigation component, no doubt, leveraging AI is a way to increase the speed. And so let's talk a little bit about containment. The first kind of thing that I want to touch on is the shift in mindset over the last couple of years, but particularly the last year. I kind of like the 80-20 rule. I can tell you 2 years ago, if I were to be asked a question, I'm like, how many people kind of contain and ask questions later, or contain then investigate, so that they're on their front foot and they're containing? And I'd say less than 20%. And if you were to ask me that question today, I'd flip it, right? Less than 20% aren't doing it, meaning 80% of our customers are leaning into a contain first approach, and then investigate. And so at the end of the day, if you want to get to a containment in less than 5 minutes, you're going to want to kind of go from, hey, you're going to want to automate as much as you can, understanding that there will be some scenarios where you need to qualify what happened, meaning you got to do an investigation before you contain. But I don't know what you're seeing. I know that's the position that I've taken on this. I'm very aggressive, as you might expect. I'm a security company. Most people don't push back, and I'm not near the size and scale and complexity of you. But your take on kind of what you've seen and your own experience here.
I think over the years, we've found that containing first makes a lot of sense. And I will say our organization as in general has been moving more towards automation of all sorts of types. So we're already doing in our development, the self-service and all those other things where we're automating more and more things that used to have a person in the middle. So I get a lot less pushback than maybe some organizations would. But I will tell you, containing first has solved so many more issues where, like, say, there's a problem with a server, we contain it, and that just doesn't spread. It just stops. And if it's not like, like something that will break the entire university for shutting off, even if it stops things for a while, that's not ideal. It's one of those things where, the risk of, I think everyone used to talk about the risk of containing early. And now really it's the risk of not containing early, because just there's so many bad things that can happen if you're too conservative on that. And so really the question is, can you afford not to contain things early at this point? And knowing that there will be times that maybe something will happen that maybe it's a little bit overzealous. But I have found, and I don't just mean IT management, I mean above IT, I have found that management in the past, when we have contained things early, have been very not just cooperative, but understanding, and they get the risks at this point, because it's all about risk, and there's heavy risk of not containing early at this point.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and I have a couple, some anecdotal evidence, anecdote, if you will. I'm one of the 4 to 5 executives that kind of will reach out, that calls out to a peer executive if something goes bump in the night and they have an incident. And kind of this goes towards both the speed and the automated containment. At the end of the day, I was working, with a media company, and this was a Blockbuster alert. This was a Teams type of thing, where they're just artful at getting on and fooling people, acting like the help desk and saying, hey, I've got to do some installation work and I got to do some fixes. And the voices are purely American, very tactful, very courteous. And yep, didn't they get it? Didn't they fool somebody? And as soon as they installed that malware, did it go to work on enumerating the domain controllers and finding it actually found what I'll call a default configuration, many would say a misconfiguration, that allows a domain user to pull from the certificate authority domain admin certs, which then can be used to escalate the actual privilege of the domain user that they were able to fool. And so that all happened in 27 minutes. And if we hadn't isolated that host automatically, I guarantee they would have been off to the races. And so just one of those things where, we have a host type issue and we see there's a host type issue, an alert, and we take action automatically. And I can tell you there's another incident that I was involved in where we didn't have that capability in place. And fortunately, we were able to contain it. But it got to multiple hosts and got to a few service accounts and others that took us longer to sort out. And so this idea of containing first and investigating later is real. And, on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about where do you do that and how do you decide to do that? And so, we'll kind of move to the next slide here and talk about response domains. And these are not the only 4 response domains, but something you'll learn if you're with us or if you want to be with us or are looking to be a ReliaQuest customer. What you're going to find is we're going to push you very, very aggressively to at least have response options in these 4 control domains. And we call them kind of, essential containment control domains. And so on these, you can see, you need to be able to, kind of the network security, got to be able to block at the edge, right? Some people block at the firewall, others might do it at a Zscaler or a proxy. There's a number of places you can block at the edge, but you want to be able to block a domain, block a port, block an IP address. If you need to, block some sort of application. At EDR, you got to be able to mitigate at the endpoint, right? And many of you know all of these, right? Isolate a host, it's a fairly aggressive move, but block an IOC, ban a hash, delete a file, remove malware, etc. Identity and access, you got to be able to manage credentials. So that's reset a password, disable a user, terminate a session. And then finally, I always say, hey, you want to be able to remediate an email incident. That means delete all the phishing emails out of the number of boxes, meaning maybe you want to block the sender, maybe you want to block a whole email domain. So just to have plays across each of these containment domains. And so, for me, I've got plays in every one of these. And then it comes down to hey, you got to get a little nuanced, right? Not sure I want to isolate a critical asset if I get some sort of EDR hit on it. So now it's a matter of for me, I have some exclusion lists in place and I'm willing to isolate any user host and I'm willing to do that fairly liberally, but I'm not willing to do that on some critical assets. you're much bigger than I am, and I know you've kind of wrestled with this, and I'm curious to hear kind of some of your approaches on like, hey, what have you done in these response domains, and what have you liked about our ability to
Yeah,
grant?
so the place we really started really was in the middle, right? EDR and IADM. Those were really the two places we started. And IADM was kind of very straightforward because a lot of the IADM stuff is stuff you can do really quick. And if you're affecting something, you're affecting one person. Simple and straightforward. And we found we got a lot of bang for our buck doing that too. By the way, that was the thing where all of a sudden we started doing that, and a lot of things started changing. The EDR was a little bit more difficult, but not as difficult. And I think what we found was we started isolating machines quickly. And we also started isolating servers that weren't part of, and this is a little different than other businesses, servers that didn't belong to IT, servers that were like academic servers belonging to faculty members and so on, where they had a test server running. You don't know what that is. That's just like a desktop as far as I'm concerned. And so really those kind of things all of a sudden solved a lot of our issues, because that's where a lot of our major problems came from, because not supported by IT, not done by IT. All of a sudden, if there's a problem, are they patching? Are they doing all the proper things? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And so really, we really kind of pushed that hard. And then we kind of went outward towards the other things, and, towards email security, which can be tricky, but actually you get a lot of bang for your buck when you do it right. And then on the network side, again, but you got to be careful, because there's a lot of collateral damage that's possible with both those things. So we kind of got to be more careful about those, because that affect more people at once. And so that's kind of really where, once we got confident with the middle, we were able to spread out and hit the other things, because all of a sudden we noticed it's like, with these jobs that were like, well, an automated job, there's another automated job that says reverse it in case it goes wrong. And what we found was those reverse jobs were barely ever being run, like less than 5 times in a quarter. You're like, well, that's cool. That means we're not getting many problems, and we're not going back on it. And I think that's what all of a sudden in my management said, oh, well, that makes sense. That's good. Then let's move forward. And that being able to see when there was a mistake, and being able to rectify it quickly, and then, realizing it's not really being used that heavily, gained confidence, and it gained, credibility, which is, as you know, the most important thing in security, credibility. Without credibility, you have nothing.
Yeah, that's an interesting metric. I wonder if we should probably look at that as a metric on, hey, what's your success rate on on automatic automation, on automatic containment? Because you're right. If you have that number, and you can kind of maybe market that a little bit, might be something worth measuring. And so we talked a lot about speed from detect, investigate, and respond. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is a little bit around, at the end of the day, our customers talk to us about, hey, I need ReliaQuest help to see everywhere the business operates. I need your help with automation, which we've primarily focused on today. And then I'd like you to help me get to proactive. And so this is an area that we've kind of leaned into, particularly probably really leaning into it this year, but probably mid last year, we were starting to lean into it, but we're getting a lot more calls for it as a company. So one of the things I like to kind of talk about is like, let's take, every customer has a journey to maturing security operations, and so. The foundational is kind of what we talked about. We talked about detection, investigate, and response at speed and scale. You can see automate underneath that and measure underneath that, because we talked about that at the very beginning, right? We need to automate all parts of that, and we need to measure all parts of that. But we want to actually help our customers get to proactive. And so that's the right-hand side of this slide. And I wanted to talk about a few capabilities there. So one of the things I'm really excited about is threat simulation this year. We call it detection validation. We've had a capability in place for quite a number of years, but admittedly, that left-hand side really took a priority for us, and rightfully so. you're not going to be able to say, hey, the threat knocked on my door and is running about my organization. You don't have the luxury going, well, hey, I'm threat hunting today, or I'm testing today. We'll get to that later, right? And so making sure you have a strong foundation in detection, investigation, and response is absolutely critical. However, you can achieve that over time. And we want you to be able to take advantage of some of the capabilities on the platform in order to get more proactive. And so one of the things in threat simulation that we just released is detection validation, which is, hey, you get to right click on a rule and run a simulation that actually triggers that rule. And then the corollary, which is you can run a simulation and it'll tell you the alerts that are supposed to fire based on that simulation. And obviously within that module, it's going to tell you which ones you have deployed. Threat hunting we've had for some time. That's the ability to go in and I'm kind of a fan of the hygiene hunts for our customers. As many of you know, we hunt on our customers' behalf in a number of ways. If a major campaign hits, read that, log4j, non-petya, WannaCry, whatever it is, pick your flavor, we hunt on your behalf. When we see things happen in other customer environments, we hunt on your behalf. However, we encourage customers to do hunting on their behalf, on their own behalf, and primarily in areas which I would call hygiene. And so, say you want to do a DNS hunt and you're looking at, misconfigurations or upstream DNSs that are wrong. The reason why it's better for customers to do it is you know which ones are probably right or wrong, or you probably know what the standard is more than we'll ever know, right? And if you run, another popular hunt that people like to run is like, I want to know where all my remote access tools are. And so, again, as a customer, our customers know who should have them way better than we'll ever know. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's times when, somebody's going to find a remote access tool and not know what the heck it is. But you'll have an idea probably based on maybe host name or whatever, exactly what the unit is or the department that you can go talk to. And then on the right corner there, the digital risk protection, that I look at that as a proactive tool. And of course I use all these, but that's think dark web monitoring is typically what we talk about. And I can tell you that I get anywhere from 6 to 8 things that I would never see from a SIM that are being collected with what I call eyes and ears out forward. The latest one was some weird thing where our mobile app was being hosted somewhere in Asia. I'm like, well, I'm sure that version doesn't have any malware in it. And so, we are able to take mitigation action on that. And then the latest thing called discovery is think exposure. So for Dennis, for guys like you and me, things can change quickly overnight. You can have a major trending campaign, a threat campaign that's exploiting some vulnerability that you may have, I may have, everybody may have. Or there's a 0-day vulnerability that's discovered. And again, overnight, our exposure to a threat exploiting that, and so read that risk, changes. And this intersection between your assets, your identities, your hosts, your assets, and threat allows us to kind of help prioritize and allows us to help our customers, prioritize what they should pay attention to relative to fairly dynamic changes in the environment, which is something that we always have to deal with as CISOs and security professionals. So anyway, just wanted to kind of summarize a little bit on our roadmap and the way we see the journey with our customers as they spend time with us in their security operations journey. I don't know what you might be leveraging there, but I'm excited about that right-hand side and the.
Yep. No, we're really excited about the threat hunting. We've really appreciated the threat hunts that you guys do. We've been experimenting with doing our own threat hunts. That's something that we've been really starting to do. But the threat simulation is something that we're actually just starting the journey on right now, which is something that's definitely something that was mentioned to us in an audit, and something like, well, how do you know it works? And that's, we're like, well, we have the threat simulation. And so I think, so it helps us not only on the security side, but on the, compliance side.
Yeah, nice. And so I know we're getting a little bit up on time, so maybe wrap up a bit. So want to summarize a few points here. We talked a little bit about detected source. We talked about automated data containment and the AI capability. And one of the pitfalls that I would say is, hey, what do you want to avoid? You want to avoid being a little bit too conservative, meaning, listen, there are ways to mitigate the risk of some of these containments. But at the end of the day, I think if you're too conservative, the risk of not taking those plays, and I think you said it well, is probably higher than the risk of taking it. And then just something that I like to talk about, like, listen, we're maniacally on this vision of mean time to contain in less than 5 minutes. So we've talked about those three components, and I'm going to give you a few numbers here on where we are kind of as a business. So mean time to detect is now less than 10 minutes, but this is on average, right? So not every detection, in fact, probably the minority of detections still are detected source. Many of them are still in the SIM. But when you take them together, we are actually getting to less than 10 minutes in that number. Some, if you're detected source, are 3 to 5. So all of our detected source are 3 to 5. Gray matter queries those detected source very fast. And of course, that's the schedule that they're on, and the compute capacity of that schedule can keep up with that periodicity. On mean time to contain, less than 11 minutes. Now, this is all modes, meaning fully executed or qualified, meaning there are alerts that you say, if this alert fires, automate. No human in the middle. There are other alerts where you want a human to qualify it, again, a risk mitigation thing, before an alert is taken, whether we qualify it or the customer qualifies it. Somebody qualifies it, then the alert fires. When you look at both of those modes, we're at about 11 minutes. If it's an automated one, it happens in 2 to 3 minutes. And then mean time to investigate. The AI model is taking less than 17 minutes on average. And some people are like, why is it taking so long? The longest component of an AI investigation is actually the pivot searches, is actually doing an API call into a technology and pulling that data back, and then doing this, doing the automation and the summary on that. It's less time. It's the actual query time that actually takes up the most time. Now, again, that's 2.5, almost threefold, because most of our investigations are, if it's human, taking 40 to 50, maybe 40 to 60 minutes. So again, 2.5 to 3 times less. Now, the cool number is when you take all those things together, mean time to respond, that whole spectrum has been reduced by about 83%. And so just current numbers, and to be honest, those numbers have come down a bit since I last took them, but we're not quite there on every alert being less than 5 minutes, but we're on a journey, and we're on a journey with our partners to do that. And so, listen, I think we're getting up on time here. Dennis, it's absolutely been a pleasure kind of talking through some of these things. And let me, I think we got a couple of questions. Let me take a look here at the Q&A. Yeah, here's one. Got a question here that says, are there any technologies that you would connect directly to gray matter and to the SIM? Actually, that's a great question. For sure. There's 2 reasons why you might do both. So for me, an example would be, I want my IDS alerts from my firewall fast, right? So I do a direct connect to my firewall, happens to be Palo. However, I also recognize that I need blocks and allows in my SIM for analysis purposes. And so there absolutely are going to be reasons and times when you want the technology to be both directly connected to gray matter through bidirectional APIs for not only detection, but also response plays, but that you might need the data in a storage, can be a SIM, or it could be a data lake for either A, other correlation reasons, B, other analytic reasons, so you need that data for analysis, or C, the last area I would say is for compliance reasons. And so there's often times when you may do, kind of what I say dual, kind of hybrid data source where you're kind of dual connecting that. Great question. I think we have another question here is, how should customers decide which response plays to use first? Yeah, that's a good question. I think why don't you take a shot at that one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what we did, and I think what I think everyone should do is you start off with the ones that are the least risk, so that you can get some quick wins and fast wins, right? You do ones that are only going to affect one user at a time, one machine at a time, desktop at a time, and then you spread out to things that are more risky. The reason why is once your management and your team sees that you're not getting many false positives, you're not getting much, and we haven't, then suddenly you can get a little braver and start to do things that might be something that maybe 2 years ago no one would ever do. And so I really think you start off with low risk, you start off with things like identity, really big wins on identity fast, EDR, blocking machines, huge wins that make a big difference. And then suddenly the things like email and network, which are kind of like, used to be the third rail, you can actually start to touch. And people are like, well, it worked with the other stuff. So I really think it's all, again, about credibility and people giving you trust. And the best way to get trust, really honestly, is do things that you get early successes on and won't blow up the enterprise.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I mean, I love your approach on it. Some of our customers I see are a little more, can be a little more conservative. And so, there are a lot of plays that are almost low risk, right? So when you talk about at the endpoint, deleting a file or deleting malware, banning a hash, right? On, deleting malicious email out of a mailbox, or blocking a phishing domain or sender. Those are really pretty low to no risk. And so we see a lot of that being done. Also, the other thing to mitigate risk is kind of exclude certain assets that you mentioned this, you're not going to actually isolate. So I think there's just a whole lot of ways to tailor the maturity, your maturity roadmap based on, risk appetite and culture of the organization. And so, and one of the things we have gotten much better and more granular. We've got a workflows capability coming up that allows you to get really, really granular when
we're
to
excited
take
about that.
play. And that's due out here at the end of July, where you can really say, okay, if it's this organization, or if it's not a VP, or it's not somebody with a certain title, you can really get pretty granular with when to take those. And what I like about automating it is you're going to get consistency, speed, and transparency when you automate something. And so looking forward to that capability. I think we've taken probably more time than we deserve from our audience today. So thank you, everybody, for spending a little bit of time with us, and hope to see you on the high ground in some ReliaQuest event in the near future. Thanks, everybody. Make it a great today.